Hey guys, how are you? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing a review of a prison film from Australia, English language, released in the year 1980, directed by Stephen Wallace, and this film is called Stir. And the story to Stir is as follows. Stir tells the unflinching story of the bloodiest riot in Australian prison history. Unwillingly finding themselves at the centre of this violent event are China Jackson, a semi-habitual minor criminal wanting to keep his nose clean, and Norton, a warden deeply ashamed of his former treatment of prisoners and now seeking redemption. Stir shows how both men are ultimately driven to desperate violence when tensions inside the gaol build to an explosive finale where the prisoners are caged, jeered, gassed, and then made to run the violent gauntlet of armoured revenge-seeking warders. So the movie tells the story of the bloodiest riot in Australian history. The actual movie was made in 1980, but this event took place in the 70s in Bathurst Jail. So the movie starts off with China Jackson, who is the main character. He is seeking redemption for himself. Years ago, he was in the same jail that resulted in a bloody riot. And so he went to the press and he told them how brutal the guards were in that particular moment. So he has since left the jail, but now he has come back to the same jail because he has been caught shoplifting and he's there for 6 months. So the warden and his men still have unfinished business because they didn't appreciate the fact that China Jackson went to the press to basically give them a bad name. So his life is made very, very tough. But then eventually the warden starts to feel remorse for what he did, and he starts to seek redemption in trying to make China Jackson's life as comfortable as possible inside the prison. But the warden's men don't share the same feeling. They think that prisoners don't deserve rights and that they're going to keep doing what they're doing. As a result of this behaviour, it threatens to boil over in yet another riot, and ultimately that is what the film is about, and it's depicting the riot that has gone down in Australian prison history as the bloodiest riot ever. So that's all I'm going to give you on the synopsis. What happens and who comes out of this unscathed, that's something you're going to have to find out for yourself. Now my thoughts on Stir. This one is really a forgotten film. I'd heard nothing about it, and that's a shame because Bryan Brown stars in this movie, and I think that he is the best part of the film. Now Bryan Brown, if you're not aware of Australian cinema, is an Australian iconic actor. He has been in a few Hollywood films, but he's predominantly an Australian actor in Australian movies. So you probably wouldn't recognise him if you're from overseas, but here in Australia he's a household name, and I thought he does the job perfectly. China Jackson is the main character. He's a prisoner, and he's not an unlikable prisoner. You know, some prison movies, it's all black and white, the prisoners are bad, and you think to yourself, well, they're scum, they don't deserve any rights. But this movie paints the prisoners in a very realistic way, and it makes you think a lot. And the movie's question is basically, do prisoners deserve rights? That they're the worst of the worst. These men have raped, murdered, whatever, and they're there. But have they already served their punishment? They're in a place that is not comfortable. So does it give the warden and his guards the right to bash them? And this happens. This actually happens. And I thought the realism of the film strikes you, and it makes you think to yourself, yes, you know, these prisoners have done really bad things, but they still have the right to live without being bullied and live without being bashed by these people who we put our trust in. And so that's ultimately what the film asks you, and you're continually thinking to yourself, yeah, you know, this is wrong. And that wouldn't have been able to be as powerful as it is if the prisoners weren't likable, and they are. Yes, as I said, some of them have done really bad crimes, but they have likable qualities. So you can connect to them, and you don't condone what they're doing, but you feel to yourself that yes, they are in a hellhole, and that's basically the punishment enough, and that they deserve to live their lives, but the warden and his men are starting to attack them. Now, what makes it complicated is that there is a reason why the warden is doing what he's doing, because ultimately they're scared of the prisoners, and that they say in the film that, you know, there's so many more prisoners than there are guards, so the only way to command control is to be as brutal as possible. So you can kind of, while you're not condoning what the prisoners are doing and while you're not condoning what the guards are doing, you feel sorry for the whole situation, because basically it is a pressure cooker, and ultimately, inevitably, it's going to boil over, and it's something really bad's going to happen, and that threat is always there. And I thought the director held control of that threat very, very well. Now, my problem with the film is that by the end of it, I thought it was very anticlimactic. For such a violent piece of Australian prison history, it wasn't that memorable. And I thought to myself, yeah, it was pressurizing itself to a massive climax, but that climax was not there. And I didn't know whether or not the director was afraid to push it to the limits, but then you think to yourself, well, the limits were there. I mean, and throughout the film, it's just continually getting more and more suspenseful because you know that the treatment of these guards to the prisoners is going to, explode. But then at the end, you think to yourself, well, it didn't explode the way I thought it would. It's kind of like the firecracker that doesn't quite go off into, the air and illuminate the sky. It doesn't illuminate the viewer at the end. And that's my biggest problem with it. I just thought that it was a very disappointing way to finish what was a very promising film. Now, the outdated look of it, made in the 1980s, usually that is a problem. But I actually thought the outdated, grainy sort of look made the film extra realistic. Some prison movies, yes, they depict the brutal lifestyle, but it's a very polished look. But this movie feels very dirty. I thought the excessive coarse language, usually that is a problem for me, but in this regard, I thought it captured the prison lifestyle perfectly. There are some movies in prison where you think to yourself, well, they're not quite talking the way you would. These people are very tough. They've done awful things. They're from, tougher sort of backgrounds, but in some movies, you think that the very clean language is not quite excessive enough to make you really feel like you're in the moment. But this film does it perfectly. There's a lot of C words, a lot of F words, and once again, I don't like it for just the sake of swearing, but this movie, it just captures the prison environment very, very well. The violence is there, but it's not excessive, it's not glorified, and that's the beauty of the movie. It's not glorified. It's just showing you the harsh realities inside of the prison, the tensions that rise between those who are trying to command authority and those who are basically rejecting the authority and basically wanting better conditions. And you can understand the prisoners what they want, and you can understand that sometimes to get authority, to get respect, you have to use force. And that can have consequences as well. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. It's going back and forth, and that's what keeps you interested in the movie. So I thought the acting from the supporting cast was excellent. There's a few household Aussie names as well. I'm not quite sure who played the warden, but he did a great job. There is a line of dialogue towards the end of the movie that really captures the essence of the film. He's basically saying that he's absolutely scared. He has this tough sort of facade, and that he needs to be tough, but he is not happy with what he's doing. But that's the only way that they could put these prisoners in line. So it's just definitely a look at the social classes inside prisons in Australia in the 70s and how they worked. And yes, they are very different these days, but back in those days, they were vastly outnumbered. The technology, the conditions weren't as good, and it's basically just a pressure cooker that is waiting to explode. But as I said, the fact that it doesn't have a very good ending kind of lets it down to some extent, and that was disappointing because it really was a good film up until then. But having said that, it is still a very good film. If you're a fan of prison movies, then Stir is probably one you haven't heard of. Brian Brown is definitely the best part as the character. He plays just a very troubled sort of character, and that's the beauty of the film. No one is really unlikable, although, in the movie you get told that they've done some pretty horrific things. There's always that human element that makes you think to yourself, well, yeah, they've done bad things, but they're trying to redeem themselves, and that's the same with the warden. So it's not black and white, there's a lot of grey in it, and in the end what you get is a really realistic look into the life of a very troubled time in Australian prison history. So overall for Stir, I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Barring the ending, I actually thought that it is well worth the time. Alright guys, that's my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.